listener production.
Hi, Helen Smith here with you. Welcome to The Briefing. You might have seen the PM this week denying that a secret deportation deal was signed with one of our Pacific neighbours. But is that the whole truth?
This is a deal they've signed with Nauru, and they won't show it to the public who are going to be paying for it. They won't show it to the Parliament who are meant to be put in and under scrutiny. I mean, the Prime Minister can say whatever he likes, but on this he's plainly wrong. It's a secret deal.
What we know about our government's $400 million deal is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spyrou. It's Wednesday, the 3rd of September.
Hey Helen, and to you listening. Kicking things off in Melbourne, where neo-Nazi leader Thomas Sewell has been arrested and will face court today over his alleged involvement in an attack on a First Nations protest camp over the weekend. The 32-year-old is accused of being a part of a group of 40 men dressed in black belonging to the National Socialist Network, some armed with flagpoles and sticks, who violently attacked Camp Sovereignty following the anti-immigration March for Australia rally on Sunday. Sewell was arrested outside the Melbourne's Magistrate Court yesterday afternoon after appearing in court on other charges relating to intimidating a police officer and breaching an intervention order.
Earlier in the day, and actually while on his way to court, Sewell had gate-crashed a press conference held by Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen, shouting insults and making false claims about protest rights.
We need to pause for a check.
Don't put your hands on me. Hey, Jacinta Allen, why don't Australians have the right to protest?
Taking to socials yesterday, the Premier said she had never expected to come face-to-face with a neo-Nazi at a press conference, but that it reminded her of the importance of fighting for every single Victorian, regardless of their race or religion.
And I'll continue to fight for every single Victorian and push back against this odious, evil behaviour of such a small number of people who I know. That's not who Victorians truly are.
Police also charged two other men aged 20 and 23 in relation to the Camp Sovereignty attacks on Sunday. They have been granted bail with a court date set in December. As for Sewell, he's been remanded to appear at Melbourne's Magistrate Court today, charged with causing violent disorder, affray and assault.
Overseas now to the US, where a federal judge has ruled Donald Trump's deployment of the National Guard during the LA protests was illegal. The order comes after the state of California sued the Trump administration, claiming the troops it sent to Los Angeles during immigration raids and anti-ICE protests in June and July violated a law prohibiting military enforcement of domestic laws.
Yeah, and California's Democrat governor and potential presidential candidate Gavin Newsom has overnight reacted to the ruling, taking to X and posting in all caps, "Donald Trump loses again," going on to say the courts agree his militarization of our streets and use of the military against US citizens is illegal. Now, Helen, this ruling comes less than a week after a US appeals court ruled that most of Trump's global tariffs were also illegal. And it also comes while Trump is threatening to deploy the National Guard to Democratic-led cities like New York, Baltimore and Chicago. We do know that the National Guard is currently deployed in Washington, but this is federal jurisdiction, which means that Trump is within his legal rights to deploy the National Guard here, which is a very different situation to what we saw unfolding in California.
As house prices soar across the country and rentals hit record highs, it's been revealed that more than half of our federal MPs and senators own investment properties or multiple homes. 125 out of 226 politicians, that's roughly 56% of the parliament, have declared owning multiple properties, with at least 92 also disclosing they have properties listed as investment or rental, with around 50 receiving rental income as landlords.
Yeah, and the property portfolios owned by some of our country's top leaders include holiday homes, beach shacks, second houses interstate and overseas real estate. According to The Guardian's analysis of the Parliamentary Register of Interests, it found the top two politicians on the leaderboard were Tony Burke, the Home Affairs Minister, who has 6 properties, and Michelle Ananda Raja, the Labor MP turned Senator for Victoria, who also has 6 properties listed.
Now, looking at the PM and the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, who lives at the Prime Minister's residence in Canberra, has listed 2 investment properties, while Susan Lee has declared 4 properties, including a residential and 2 investments. And the only lower house member not to have lodged his register of interest is Queensland MP Bob Katter. Now, the purpose of the register of members' interests is to place on the public record members' interest which may conflict or be seen as a conflict with their public duty. So Katter hasn't listed any interests on the register for the current 48th Parliament that could be seen as a conflict, but he has previously, as recent as the last sitting Parliament.
I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am just for what I said. There was no excuse. It was wrong, and I take full responsibility.
Adelaide Crows player Izak Rankine has spoken publicly for the first time about a homophobic comment he made during a game, saying it was harmful and that he let a lot of people down.
I understand that word is offensive, it's harmful, it's hurtful, and it has no place in our game or our society.
The 25-year-old AFL player went on to say he was in no way a victim and that he will be apologising to his teammates and the AFLW, saying it was at the very least what they deserve.
Rankine was suspended by the AFL for 4 matches over the incident last month, which sparked a wider discussion of homophobia within the code and across our sporting industry, with the AFL having several similar incidents in recent years. Now, in a previous written statement released by the player, he acknowledged what he did was wrong and took full responsibility before heading overseas on a club-approved trip amid the penalty. Since this most recent incident of homophobia, we did see former West Coast Eagle Mitch Brown become the first AFL player in the sport's history to come out as gay or bisexual.
Our colleague Antoinette Lattouf is returning to the federal court today, where it'll be determined what penalties, if any, the ABC must pay over her unlawful termination. The Weekend Briefing host won her unfair dismissal case against the public broadcaster back in June after the federal court found she was let go from a casual cover in 2023 for reasons that included her political opinion. And that, of course, came after she shared a Human Rights Watch post accusing Israel of using starvation as a weapon of war in Gaza.
In the initial ruling, Antoinette was awarded $70,000 for the distress caused by the sacking and fallout, and today her legal team is arguing the ABC should pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for its various contraventions of the law. The public broadcaster is seeking a lower amount, reportedly between $37,000 and $56,000. The hearing will be live streamed on the Federal Court of Australia's YouTube.
And what's the wildest thing you've found in your lunch? A hair, some fluff, a bug? What about a battery? Well, one unlucky Queensland woman found exactly that, a small silver button battery in her Guzman & Gomez burrito bowl.
Now, whilst eating the bowl, Stephanie Weston says she luckily spotted the battery in time and returned to the store where the assistant manager explained it had come from a thermometer, offering a refund and 2 burrito vouchers as compensation. Now, while this is a very bizarre incident, button batteries can actually cause serious chemical burns and potentially life-threatening internal injuries if swallowed. And a spokesperson from Guzman & Gomez says the company has initiated a full investigation into the matter, confirming the battery did come from this food-grade thermometer and has been in contact with Stephanie.
Yes, and now I'm going to take us out of the serious for a moment because I love this. I love hearing stories like this. While I was traveling, I have a friend who is very pedantic about his food, and he always complains about food. He's one of those people. And as luck would have it, a bug was wrapped into his spaghetti, which was hilarious for all of us, not hilarious for him. But what's the weirdest thing you found in your food?
I've definitely found a few bugs, but I don't mind eating those.
Sorry, what? What do you mean? Like cockroaches?
No, like just little bugs, like flies, ants and stuff. They're fine. But I think once I did find a little bit of a metal sponge in some Thai food, and that was a bit like, oof, that could be dangerous.
Yeah.
We also want to know what you guys have heard, and we'll pop a question in our broadcast channel. What is the wildest, potentially dangerous or just grossest thing you found?
Yes, that prompt will be up in our broadcast channel on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. Go there right now and let us know. We love hearing from you. That is it for our headlines for today. Coming up next is my deep dive, looking into our multi-million-dollar deal with Nauru, whether or not it was a secret, and what our country's senators know about it. That is coming up for you next. What dollar figure would you put on deporting non-citizens to another country? Well, for the Australian government, it's in the hundreds of millions. Late last week, our Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke visited Nauru, signing an agreement to give $408 million to the Pacific nation some 3,000 kilometres away from us to resettle at least 280 non-citizens. Now, Nauru's long been Australia's dumping ground for refugees, but this new deal specifically has got to do with the NZYQ cohort, that group of non-citizens whose visas were cancelled due to criminal convictions or on other character grounds that have been living in the community since 2023 following a High Court ruling that indefinite immigration detention was unlawful. The Home Affairs Minister says these are people who have no legal right to stay in the country and that their deportation is a fundamental element of a functioning visa system. But for the Greens' immigration spokesperson, this deal, as well as proposed legislation in the pipeline, is evidence of a toxic and far-right immigration policy. Senator David Shoebridge, welcome back to the briefing. You've described this deal as forcing Nauru to turn into a 21st century prison colony. Why is that?
Well, I mean, that's essentially what this deal is designed to do. Rather than dealing with our Pacific neighbours as friends to try and build relationships of equality and economic and cultural ties, we're literally saying to Nauru, the only way you can engage with us is if you take people that we want to deport, hold them on your country for decades against their will. I don't know how else to describe that than basically a 21st century prison colony. Like, Nauru should be a friend and a neighbour, and the idea that that's our view of our future economic relationship with them, to be holding people for decades against their will because Australia wants to deport them, I think it's an appalling way of dealing with our neighbours. And the rest of the Pacific are watching, and they can see Australia acting like literally a bully in their corner.
Arguably, though, this is an agreement that was signed by two governments acting freely. Is there anything to suggest there was any coercion or undue influence here?
Oh, no, we just offered them a ruddy great big bribe, a $400+ million bribe as a signing bonus, and then $70 million a year. And I think what's incredibly frustrating about this is we can't even see the agreement. And in fact, you know, this exchange I'm having with you, I'm an Australian senator. We have a responsibility for oversighting immigration policy and government expenditure. The information we found out has largely come from a slightly garbled report about what the Nauruan president said in the Nauruan parliament. They don't have Hansard. And also from a Facebook post from the Nauruan government. And all we've got from the Australian government is basically a one-line statement from the Home Affairs Minister saying he wants to be able to deport anyone who doesn't have a visa.
Yeah, and we will get to the criticisms of transparency in a moment. I do want to ask you, though, how geared is a country like Nauru to deal with this?
I mean, we're talking in the first run about 300 people who the Australian government wants to actively deport from a country the size of Australia with, 27, 28 million people in it. Obviously, we have a capacity to absorb those people. Many of them have been found to be genuine asylum seekers, and a country the size of a continent with 27 million people has a far greater capacity to provide the supports, safely integrate them into society than a country like Nauru, which is, a couple of square kilometres, a population of about 10,000 people with a very, very troubled economy. And what are we saying to Nauru will be their future? I mean, the inequality in the relationship is really clear when you just think about those basic statistics.
Some do say that this deal is all about protecting the Australian population, especially since some in that NZYQ cohort have reoffended after their release back into the community. Isn't the government justified in wanting to remove them from the Australian community and from Australian spaces?
Well, first of all, the legislation the government's passed with the help of the coalition last year, and they're trying to amend it again this week to make it even more unfair, doesn't apply to a couple of hundred people. It applies to about 100,000 people on bridging visas and who don't have permanent rights to stay in the country. The overwhelming majority of those have no criminal record at all. And I don't accept the government's frame that the way we should deal with prior criminality, which has already gone through the criminal courts and been dealt with under criminal law, the way we should deal with it is using deportation powers. And even assuming the government's argument, their frame about these people being unsafe in our community, which is a much bigger, much better resourced community, is true, and I don't accept that argument for a second. There's no evidence that this whole cohort is a risk. But if that is true, how on earth can we then say to Nauru, which is a tiny country, without the checks and balances, without the protections, without the policing, without the kind of resources, how can we say to them, actually, well, you take them and release them in your community? Because that's what Nauru is going to do. Having this arrangement with Nauru, again, shows how obscenely unequal that relationship is.
Something you mentioned there was this bill that's been introduced by the government, and that's essentially looking to override some of the obligations the Australian government owes non-citizens facing deportation. Can you explain specifically what those proposed changes mean? Because like you did mention, they do extend far beyond this specific cohort.
Before someone gets deported against their will and sent to Nauru, and before the Australian government goes to Nauru and says, give this person a visa and we're going to deport them, the law says people have to be heard in that. They have a right to know that the application is being made. They have a right to make representations about whether it should happen. Many of these people have families and strong social connections in Australia. This is breaking up families. They have health concerns. They have a right to have a say, before they are deported. Now, the government may then say, well, we've heard you and we still want to deport you, but you have a right of natural justice. And the government, it appears, has not given that right to a bunch of people they're trying to deport. They've taken the case to the High Court. There are 3 cases in the High Court now about the government failing to give people natural justice, even talking to them, getting their views before they deport them. The government's obviously got its lawyers who said they're likely to lose those cases, that they haven't given them natural justice. They haven't done that. So what do? They're now trying to rush through legislation to retrospectively remove the right to natural justice from all of those people, to break up families, deport people, send them to Nauru against their will without even giving them the right to be heard. And that's pretty obscene, Chris.
What do you think that signifies about the direction Australia is heading when it comes to issues of immigration and refugee processing?
When the government came up with this package of laws in the last parliament, which was about forced deportations, breaking up families, jailing people indefinitely if they won't willingly agree to a deportation, the whole sector, the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the whole sector said that demonising people who have come to this country simply because they're trying to seek asylum, trying to paint them all as criminals and a risk to Australian society and a security risk to Australian society, that demonises not just this handful of people who may have a criminal record, it demonises everybody seeking asylum. And then it attacks multicultural Australia, and it can lead to some ugly rhetoric in the community about multiculturalism and immigration. They were told this. We resisted it because we were concerned about those risks. And what have we seen? Well, we've seen that rhetoric from the Labor Party and the Coalition being used in rallies just on the last weekend to drive anti-immigration rhetoric, to suggest that migrants are inherently criminal, that asylum seekers are violent. And none of that is true, but it's been fed in large part by a narrative driven by our own government, the Labor Party, and by the opposition.
Another element here, and something that we touched on a little bit earlier, is criticisms around transparency. The deal was quietly announced late on Friday. The statement that we received from Home Affairs was very brief. I believe it was 6 lines in total. The PM has said it was hardly a secret deal, with more detail to come in due course. What do you make of that?
Well, if the PM says it's not a secret deal, show us the deal. That's a pretty simple test. The deal is secret. They refuse to release it. We're going to be putting a motion in the Senate this week to try and force its release. We imagine the government will resist that. But I don't know how much more secret a deal can be than one that no one can see. This is a deal they've signed with Nauru, and they won't show it to the public, who are going to be paying for it. They won't show it to the Parliament, who are meant to be putting it under scrutiny. The Prime Minister can say whatever he likes, but on this he's plainly wrong. It's a secret deal. There's the $400+ million sign-on bonus, and then there's something like $70 million a year that they're going to be given. Now, what are Nauru required to do for that? Is there income support for people that we're deporting? Is there going to be medical support for people we're deporting? What is the $70 million a year and the $400 million sign-up actually going to be used for? Is it going to be keeping people safe? Is it going to be ensuring that people with very real chronic health conditions don't die in Nauru? And I think one of the other reasons why we're all very fearful about this deal with Nauru is that a few months ago, when Nauru put their hand up to sign an agreement, the initial agreement with Australia to deport people to Nauru, the Nauruan president said that his long-term plan, and Nauru's long-term plan, is to send these people back to the country they came from. And that's not Australia. That is Afghanistan, Iran, Sudan, places where these people have been found to have a well-founded fear of being killed or tortured if they're returned back to those countries. And Nauru has said that is their plan, to send them back eventually to those countries. Is that covered in the agreement?
Before we let you go, for someone listening here who just doesn't care, I mean, they've heard this story, they've heard how we've discussed it, and they just think to themselves, these people absolutely have no right to be living in Australia. Whatever happens to them, happens to them. What would your message to them be?
Well, I'd say that the overwhelming bulk of these people have been found to have a genuine fear of persecution, of being tortured or facing serious harm if they're returned to the countries they've fled. A tiny minority of people who have come to Australia seeking asylum have committed a crime in this country or have a prior criminal offence. And that offending should be dealt with through our criminal justice system and should be punished and dealt with accordingly. And in every one of these cases, it has been. What we don't want is we don't want a bunch of bureaucrats or government ministers deciding that they will use our immigration laws to doubly punish people. And in the course of doing that, strip away any of their basic human rights. And more fundamentally, people who have come to Australia as refugees seeking asylum, they have made enormous contributions to our society. They're often people of enormous courage and enormous get up and go. And we should be celebrating that part of our migration story, that part of our multicultural Australia, instead of demonising them like this. And I'd finally say this. Think how small Nauru is. And Nauru says that it can safely accommodate these people in their country with none of the economic benefits that we have, none of the scale or size that we have. And honestly, ask yourself, is our government telling the truth about the threat these people play to society? Because I don't believe they are. And I think this kind of scare campaigning, this attack on immigrants and asylum seekers does them no credit.
David Shoebridge, thank you so much for joining me on The Briefing.
Pleasure, Chris. Good speaking.
That was Greens Senator David Shoebridge speaking with me there. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That is it for now. We'd love it if you could share this episode with someone who you think might enjoy it. And while you're there, be sure to leave us a rate and review wherever you are listening. I'm Chris Spyrou. Catch you next time.